Hello, I am here today to talk to you about the goddess. So let's get started, shall we? In this video, I will talk about the skull and bones and explain your demons to you. I saw a video recently about the different veils around us that people are trying to pierce and see through, and they could only get up to a certain few veils, which one of the last veils was about the demons. Well, once you get to the demons, it's easy to pierce that veil. You just have to try to figure out who the demons are, which is what I'm going to do for you now. And then the next veil after that to pierce is to realize that we are the adults in charge on this planet, and we can make the planet and lives that we want, because we're the human beings here making our lives happen. I'm going to read this because it's kind of long. It's a lot of information, and so I just wrote it all down for you, okay? In order to really follow me in this video, I just need you to open your mind to the possibility that maybe everything that you think could be wrong. It might not be true, or it might be a misrepresentation. The skull and bones. What is the skull and bones group? A scary group of leaders from Harvard? I don't think so. It's not so scary after all, or at least I don't think it was meant to be. I don't know how they are operating now, but I know how I feel they should be operating and what their group should be about. See, after a long time, a group can change, and after too many retellings of a tale that someone doesn't fully understand, they might not even know what their original roots were. I don't know. Their enemies can infect them, and slowly, even they will change to become more like their enemies and feel that they are bad and their enemies are right. Because the ones in power will be saying that the ones in power are good, and the ones who are in a small secret society are bad, right? So one day they might get infected and think, we are the bad ones, and we must be more like them to be good. I don't know. I really don't know if that's what's happened or not, but I'm just saying it could have. So this video is what I think the Skull and Bones group is. I don't know for sure, but I think this is what it should be, but I could be wrong. Now, this video might be a little bit confusing to you if you don't know anything about Lucifer and Jesus or the Queen of Heaven. In fact, you might think you know who Jesus and Lucifer and the Queen of Heaven are, but you might not really know who they really are. Don't worry, Lady Maraclea, Mary clears the muddy waters. Okay, I came across this information because I was asked to be on an internet show recently, and they did this weird song and dance in it, and they were doing things like this. Okay, so I did that with them because I loved it. I was like, that's the X chromosome symbol, you know? Then later I was thinking about it and I was like, wait a minute, that's also the skull and bones, right? This pirate ship thing, the skull and bones symbol. So I started thinking about it, and what was instantly recognizable to me as the goddess symbol of the X chromosome of the lost and destroyed Queen of Heaven, known by many names now, I figured to start putting that together with searches under skull and bones. So I did that. As I was doing this, my own name popped into my head. My name, Sydney Silver, right? And I was wondering again, wait a minute, what is the meaning of my name? This was just kind of like a coincidence. I was like, maybe you could put the meaning of my name in with skull and bones and just see what pops up. One of the meanings of the word Sydney means of Sidon. I threw of Sidon, Skull and Bones into an online search engine. And this is what I got to. The skull and crossbones have long been known to have Masonic connections. The legend of the Skull of Sidon states that a great lady of Maraclea was loved by a Templar knight who was a lord of Sidon. Remember, my name means from Sidon. She died suddenly. On the night of her burial, he supposedly crept to her grave, dug up her body, and violated it, meaning he had sex with it. Then a voice from the void bade him return in 9 months' time, for he would find a son. So, I found the ancient legend of the Skull and Bones, which is this legend, okay? The Knight Templar comes, and he has sex with a recently dead woman. Or she could have been murdered, right? At first I was kind of in shock because my name, Sydney, means of Sidon. So Lord of Sidon means Lord Sydney. Like, literally, it actually means Lord Sydney. So that kind of shocked me. Of course, I'm not a man, but whatever's. Later on, I started realizing gender means nothing in this story because all of the female genders got changed to men. My next thought was, who the heck is the Lord of Sidon? Oh wait, I bet that was Jesus, right? Because the Lady Maraclea certainly sounds like the Lady Mary Magdalene, and she had a lord who was her lover and marriage partner. Something I proved on my website, church website, by the way. Okay, and the idea of someone who died and then is resurrected as a reanimated zombie is something very Jesus-like, right? If this is the first time you have heard me speak, don't be upset when I say that, okay? It's just the way it is. If Jesus' body is resurrected and Mary's body are resurrected and his dead body starts walking around alive again, that's what a zombie is. Okay? Isn't it? So, that's why I call Jesus and Mary zombies. Otherwise, they are reincarnated, or perhaps eternal vampires, since they did drink the blood of Christ. Okay, anyways, onwards. In fact, some versions of this story, the Skull and Bones story, have the Lord of Sidon actually marrying the Scaly Bones. So, in other words, marrying a zombie bride, which is exactly like in Revelations, when Jesus and Mary are resurrected as zombies, and their bones literally come back to life, then they get married. Jesus marries the pure church. I figured this ancient founding Skull and Bones story might be a Jesus and Mary Bible story. So I started doing research to find out if Lady Maraclea really is Lady Mary Magdalene, possibly the Lady of the Sea, because Mara means sea, Clea means clear. Okay? So first I researched what Maraclea means. Her name means clear waters or sea. It also means dark, muddy waters, which is why I said Mary clears the muddy waters earlier. I found a link, which I will link below, which shows the meanings for the name Maraclea, who is the skeleton in the Skull and Bones story. It says, Mara in Hebrew means bitter and was a common alternative for Mary. Whether the mother of Jesus or the Magdalene, which are actually, I'm going to prove, are both the same thing. In Latin, it equates to mare, which is water, lake, sea, and indeed linked to horse, female horse. Very interesting. Keep in mind what I say later about the horses that are all around the goddess. Kind of like my horse on the my kids show, Mrs. Love. Anyways. Wow, this is getting weird. Okay, wait. Where was I? I can explain all of these things. So, Mara, alternative for Mary. That's easy. Mare or horse. Well, Jesus and Mary return in the end of the Bible and Revelations on horses. Also, Christ was associated with a unicorn called a unicorn. So the unicorn and the lioness, which we see on royal shields worldwide, are representative of Christ and Mary. Christ and Mary are actually the same thing, which I hope to show you in this video. Therefore, Mary would also be associated with a horse or a unicorn. I'm going to take you back through time, through Jesus and Mary's other previous incarnations or names that they have held. You see, we started out with an original goddess. I feel I may have found the original goddess, but I'm not sure if I have her oldest incarnation and name or not. See, in the Paleolithic time periods, people were goddess worshippers. It was matriarchal. They probably saw the womb on a woman, in other words, her stomach where the baby comes from, as the portal from the spirit world into our world of life. So to them, this is where creation or God existed. They knew something happened right there in the womb, which caused us to come from there to here, right? They worshipped that, and women and vaginas, because that is where the people were coming out of. But what would you do if you lived in a matriarchy? I know what I would do when I lived in a patriarchy. I didn't like it very much. Probably certain people were very jealous and wanted to flip the scenario, right? So maybe some of the men and women in that time period got together and wanted to create patriarchy, and I think that's what they did. They killed off the goddess, they turned all of her parts and pieces into male characters or various female characters. They chopped down all of her totem poles, and they made her so bad that not only did they forbid worshiping her, they called her Lucifer. That's right. They took the original goddess and they turned her into the devil, and they made her into Satan because they hated her so much and they were that scared of a girl. So suddenly people were afraid of the goddess, and boom, they had a patriarchy which spread worldwide. Now, returning to the Skull and Bones story. Lady Mariclea. Clara, which means clear sea, would be Mary in the end of her Revelations, of course, who is known there as the Whore of Babylon and the Pure Church. She is international, and she is not bound by any nation states. As well, in Mary's goddess roots, she may have originally derived from a goddess of the sea, perhaps associated with Poseidon and the trident, because she does have a trident. Do you remember the trident missile that just got shot off over Los Angeles? It headed right up over my house too. I remember that. I'll put some links down below for you there, and I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit later, why I think possibly these things are called trident missiles and ISIS groups and things like that. I had figured out the skeleton depicts Mary Magdalene, also known as Jesus, but I decided to try to find out who the Lord of Sidon was. To further my case, I wanted to prove that the Lord of Sidon was really Jesus. So to backtrack, I figured I would, because I know that Jesus is Lucifer, so I figured I would figure out if the Lord of Sidon was Lucifer or Satan or the morning star, right? And yep, this is what I discovered. I did all these online searches for Lord of Sidon and Lucifer and Satan and stuff, and found it. In the Skull and Bones story, Jesus is also the Lord of Sidon, and Mary is also the goddess Lord of Sidon, which I'll show you in a minute. It gets confusing because they're actually all the same thing, which Jesus will tell us about in the Bible in just a second. They're just different names and versions of the exact same goddess. You know how a sponge, it's asexual, right? And when it wants to reproduce, it breaks off a piece of itself and it's the same sponge and it looks exactly the same. Well, maybe a little different with a different name. But it started out this sponge, right? And now it's this sponge. Now this sponge birthed itself. It birthed itself. So keep that in mind when later I talk to you about how Mary births herself as Jesus and Mary. Remember when Jesus got killed off, his dead body becomes a skeleton. And when the goddess queen of heaven, Mary Magdalene, got killed off by the patriarchs, she was also represented as a killed off skeleton. Remember the patriarchs came and they killed the goddess? She became a skeleton. But Jesus is also a skeleton because he was killed on the cross, right? It's just another story of when they killed him. Now that we know the skull and bones are those of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, is it really that weird to worship a skull and bones? I don't think so. But we always hear these scary things about people like George Bush kissing a skull. Or full world leaders flashing the symbols of this secret skull and bones society, which is all about Mary Magdalene and Jesus. Not so scary after all, right? Well, unless you're afraid of Jesus and Mary. Okay. I'm not personally afraid of a group that has been protecting the memory and the lineage of the ancient original goddess that you now know as Mary Magdalene and Jesus. Oh yes, and their child and each one of their children. Because remember, as the story goes, the skull and bone story goes, not only did the Lord of Sidon, which we now know as Jesus, marry and sleep with the skeleton, which is Mary Magdalene, or you could reverse that and the skeleton is Jesus. Whatever you want to do there. He came back and they had a child. Holy Grail moment. Oh yeah. Are we seeing that this skull and bones group may be the protectors of a lineage? Perhaps they have been protecting not only the knowledge of the original goddess, but also all of her next names and incarnations as the patriarchs and the cultures who killed her changed her name over and over and killed her over and over in different ways under different names and turned her into male gods and male figures and also other female figures, and they turned her into demons and Lucifers and Satans, and they made people hate her as Lilith and other religious figures. But originally, all Jesus, Mary, Lucifer was a goddess. One goddess. A goddess that the patriarchs hated and literally killed, as has been retold, such as the crucifixion of Jesus ever since. I mean, I currently take it as a compliment that everyone is so scared of girls and of pussy, because pussy is very fierce. It is not weak, even if you use the word to always mean weak. I respect my enemies for that compliment to my power, because they seem to be the only ones who know my power and the power of a woman and a pussy. I really actually appreciate that. Thank you, enemies. But for people who aren't scared of girls and of women, isn't it weird to be worshiping Mary Magdalene's skull? I mean, it is a skeleton, alright? Well, not really. If you think about it, we're always worshiping the dead Jesus up on a cross and blood pouring out of him and drinking his blood and crap like that. What's so different about it, honestly? Okay, in fact, there is a church that people go to worship the supposed skull of Mary Magdalene. I think it's a Christian church. And they kiss that skull. So they take this little voyage up a mountain and they find a skeleton skull and they kiss it. And it's not the Skull and Bones group, it's a church. So I'm going to link that down below. So no, it's not that weird. Okay, it sounds scary. I know it sounds scary. I saw this guy once and he had all these skulls in his house filled with sand, and I was like, oh, I never want to come back here again, dude. So I know it sounds scary, but really you just have to try to understand what's going on, okay? The goddess was known to walk on water, which is where the story descended into when she was known as Jesus. She's the Lady of the Sea. She's the goddess of vegetation. She had vegetarian shrines devoted to her. Her two snakes were the snakes of balance and healing, and she was a Jewish goddess when she was known as Goddess of Sarah. I'm going to put a link to all of this stuff down below in the description so you can learn more about her. In Ezekiel 28:11, there is a really good account of Lucifer being killed. In other words, the main Paleolithic goddess being killed. She and her sacred prostitute or whore of Babylon temples, because you see the goddess worship was based around sex and creation of babies and wombs. So in this passage of the Bible, which I will link below, they describe the killing off of Lucifer, who you now know as Jesus, also known as the king of Tyre and Sidon. And I discovered Tyre was either the capital of Sidon or the sister city to Sidon, and they were ruled by the same lord, or actually back then known as a goddess, who has now been killed off. Here is a photo of the goddess in a temple of Baal in Sidon. The lord of Sidon at that time was called Baal, right? Later known as Beelzebub or Lucifer. Look at this goddess. She is holding her hands in a V heart shape near her vagina to symbolize the love, and the upside down triangle for her pussy, which can also be a pyramid shape, by the way, because the pyramid being the opening of the labia if she is standing over a man, and the V being the entire genital area opening, right? So the upper and the lower pyramids can be seen as a vagina and can correlate to a vagina at the same moment. Just because she is now called Lucifer or Satan and demonized doesn't mean that she's bad. It means that the patriarchs who killed her off wanted us to think she was bad, especially when they made the worship of the Queen of Heaven illegal and forbid the golden calves, which were her goddess cow vegetarian religion symbols. These vegetarian goddess cow religions still survive today in India, but they didn't survive our witch burning days when natural female herbal healers and midwives and the men who supported them, and maybe did it too, were burnt at the stake by, some say thousands, some say millions. People were a little too afraid after that to support the goddess. Yeah, so it all went underground. I will show you more correlation with the goddess and the healers who were called witches later in a photo of the goddess. Also check this out. I looked up online the Lady of Sidon and I found this stone portrait of a lady holding up two fingers exactly like Jesus does. The rest of what I learned blew my mind. So please bear with me, because now it gets even crazier. Yes, she was known as the same goddess who is now associated with the planet Venus, or Jesus, the morning star Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, and the sacred protector of harlots. She was known back then as the whore of Babylon. They changed her sacredness into kind of like a name that we would think is nasty, right? They slandered her name as a whore and gave it a low connotation. For some reason, people now think that this is a word of slander, thanks to the patriarchs. And if you don't value your sex and you give it away for free, you're considered good. Okay, whatever. Anyways, I discovered the name of the goddess of Tyre and Sidon. Her name was Goddess Asera. This is an ancient root of the word Sarah. She is also known as Asorteth, and she later became known as Astarte, Venus, Diana, Dionysus. Her name has been Goddess Isis, a name currently being demonized, as we know through what's happening with the ISIS group right now. On and on and on, different names for her. I threw a little link below about that, about her, okay? Now, I have a theory on how this goddess became known as the man Jesus. I will reveal to you soon. It had something to do with them finally understanding that men were important too in the creation story, I believe. Anyways, did you ever notice how much Jesus loves harlots or prostitutes, just like goddess Asera, the whore of Babylon? And he had a swarm of women traveling with him that funded him? Sounds like a whore harlot cult to me. Anyway, goddess Asera, the lord of Sidon, had vegetarian shrines. She had poles with a snake on it, which depicted healing poles, right? Like we still use for the healing poles. The women who healed in her name later became called witches and were burnt at the stake, while the pharmacies stole her snake-covered poles and now use it on the hospital symbols. Here is a photo of goddess Asera, the goddess of Sidon and Tyre. You can see her hat looks like what we call the witch's hat. But back then it was a symbol of an herbal healer. As many of us know, those who were called witches were midwives and healers with plants, and the patriarchy stole this symbol after burning them. She was called the goddess of the sea, and she could walk on water. Sound familiar, the walking on water bit? She was known as the original whore of Babylon, had male and female prostitute temples, just like her later reincarnation as Mary Magdalene, the whore of Babylon prostitute in Revelations. She is the Trinity goddess, the Queen of Heaven. The Trinity originally referred to a woman's three selves, young, middle, and old. She was a virgin as young, then either the whore, a free sexual woman, or a mother, or both, in her middle incarnation, and then a crone, or an old lady. We still see her with her three heads on in places like in India, where they have statues of the goddess with three heads. This Trinity goddess, and we now understand what the Trinity means, was also descended into Allah and those religions originally, as they called one of her incarnations goddess Allat, and then later her name became known as Allah. Back to Sidon, when she was known as goddess Asera. Now we're starting to see, I hope, that goddess Asera, when they killed her off, chopped down her poles, and called her healers witches and stuff by the patriarchs, she was turned into a skeleton. Asera is actually the skeleton in the story, the recently killed off goddess, because you see these secret societies formed to protect her memory, and her memory is now a skeleton because she was killed. At least I think that's why they formed, and that's why they should have formed if they didn't. She had cross-dressing priests who dressed men who dressed as women, right? Because they felt it was an honor to be like a woman. This is also seen in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, where women have their arms possessively around a man, as if they own him, who is meekly and generously allowed the honor to wear a woman's wig to try to be as much like the goddess as he can be. The unicorn was a secret code word for Jesus in the early Christian days, I learned after I had a dream about a unicorn and a griffin and a goth. It was a really weird dream. Yeah. And I had a feeling it was psychic because I just was crying and crying and crying that they had killed the unicorn, and I woke up crying and I couldn't stop crying. So I figured, whatever, I'm going to put the word unicorn in to an online search about Jesus, and boom, I found out that Jesus was called the unicorn by the early Christians. The goddess Asera, she had the unicorn and she was with the unicorn, right? Please verify everything I'm saying online. Just go on and do a search for it. We can see here that she has the vegetarian cow horns on, or her moon goddess horns. They could be representative of both. Also the horns of Isis, right? Which is how they now portray her as a devil with the horns. Those are her same horns. They've just been turned supposedly bad. Many religions said that she was the mother and wife of Yahweh, or Jesus. Goddess Asera is not the oldest incarnation or name for her. There's also a rumor that goes around that Jesus birthed a child named Sarah, and I wonder if this goddess Asera is where that rumor came from, because she herself, like a sponge, births herself under a different name. There is so much I could tell you about Goddess Sarah, including about her snakes. I should make an entire other video about it. I'll explain her sacred snakes and about how she became a tree. By the way, snakes used to be very honored, okay? The two snakes, I also have two snakes in my logo. This was a complete coincidence and a total accident, but it's true. One I meant to represent a male, or one side, and the other to represent a woman, or one side, like two opposites but that are the same, right? In my logo, the male and the female are both equally powerful and therefore at balance. And when they are at balance, they might be hissing at each other, but then the balance helps them to kiss, and a heart is formed right in the middle of them, which is the love. Because once we realize that we are at balance and fairness, we can let go of a lot of anger and we can find love. Interestingly enough, Goddess Sarah was a Hebrew goddess. In other words, she was also Jewish. Her name may have been derived from Hera, or Hera may have been derived from her. The Egyptian, I think she was Egyptian Hera. Anyways, I haven't researched Hera yet, so I can't say anything about that. She is called the Queen of Heaven in the Bible. Research Bible, Queen of Heaven quotes. And you can see how they said, don't worship her. We don't want the goddess around. And it was forbidden to worship her, like it was bad. Wikipedia mentions that she's now known as Mary by Catholics and Christians, but I'm going to show that she isn't just Mary, the mother of Jesus. She also is Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the whole sponge theory. So she's been demonized. The patriarchs came along and they killed her and they chopped down her poles and they turned her into devil and they made it bad to worship her, and they said, don't, it's illegal to worship her now. You cannot worship the Queen of Heaven, right? And they changed everything over and they openly called themselves the patriarchs and still do. They turned her into a demon and morphed her into other biblical figures, like maybe Sarah and Abraham, because Abraham does pimp her out to the Pharaoh, if you notice. But how can this happen? Well, guess what? It was very calculated and planned. Back in when I was in USC, I learned that in Greece, ancient Greece, they actually held a play that none of the women were invited to. And now it's been unlocked, but back then it was a super secret play. And I read the play and it basically said, these women can control us with their pussies and their vaginas and the sex that they withhold from us, and that's not okay. And we have to start suppressing them and subjugating them. And here's our plan. We are going to call them a slut if they have sex, and they are going to be considered bad because now we are going to control the sex and not them. Yeah, it happened. But you know, the reason that they did so is most likely because they felt that they were underlings and slaves and subjugates and not in power to the women, and so they had a right to do that. You know, I can understand. I felt the same anger in their patriarchy that they probably felt in a matriarchy. So I can't hate them. I get it. I totally get it. Even though now I no longer believe there is such a thing as, you know, a subjugate or someone in power. I think we're all always in power. And subs have power too. The underlings have equal power to the overlings, and we all control and don't control each other. We are all subjugate to each other. The underling gets the victim power and the victim vote, and the overling gets, I don't know, sometimes they get money power, not always. By the way, both women and men can be patriarchs, okay? And they still are. And women believe in and support patriarchy. They do. Plenty of women love being powerless and playing victims. As the patriarchs came and killed Goddess Sarah off, don't you think there were some people at that time who didn't like it, and they would have decided to keep her and all of her knowledge of her alive? Yes, yes, and they would have formed secret societies to do that, right? It had to be secret because the mainstream was killing her. I believe we know some of them today as Skull and Bones, maybe some as Masons. I'm not sure. I think there's a key group or something like that too. The key I would think would be Lucifer, Jesus, you know, being the morning star. The Knights Templar, you know, the Knights Templar were possibly tasked with keeping the goddess alive. I think so, because of the Baphomet that they were seen worshipping. I don't know who is keeping records of all of her names and incarnations. Maybe it's under the Vatican. I don't know. Maybe someone can ask the Pope for me. By the way, this is a Knights Templar cross. So now we have the Skull and Bones group, maybe, and possibly others, saving all the secret knowledge of this goddess, possibly without even knowing what they are doing. Possibly the information was fragmented and scattered so as not to be discovered fully, so it could not be destroyed until the world was back at a place where the world could re-accept the goddess and we could have matriarchy again with patriarchy. Because now we've had both, right? And honestly, I don't think we should go back to one or the other. Why not have both? Like the balanced snakes. Both in power. Or not in power, whatever you choose. You might not like being in power, and I get that. So you don't have to be. Anyways, these secret groups themselves may have started to believe they were evil because, well, that's what a few thousand years of being told by the patriarchs can do to your mind. You get told you are evil often enough, and you might actually start to believe that you are evil. What I believe happened is that at some point in time, people realized you need a man to create a baby, not just a woman. In other words, it wasn't just the goddess in her womb that was the mother of all creation, or God. So, because the planet Venus conveniently rises once in the morning and then once at night and is the same thing at the opposite time, right? Like a same but opposite, they just decided to make the morning star into Jesus, a male figure, and the evening star, Venus, into a female goddess figure, the moon goddess. So they threw a man into the mix. They just turned, one side, to be fair, into a man, which I'm cool with. So now the female goddess Venus Asera, the original one female goddess, had become transformed into a male and a female symbol, which I feel is fine. It's fair. It's fair to let men have some power too. And I like powerful men. Why not? So now they had started to worship the combination of a male and a female as the creation force of God, which is when the baby comes here from there, right? And a God creation thing is happening. The consciousness is arriving from who knows where in the womb. So here's a photo of what the Knights Templar were worshipping and maybe still do, along with possible other secret societies. This is the Baphomet. They worshipped a horned skull, as we already discussed, the goddess cow horns and moon symbol. It is represented as a male and a female combination figure because they threw the male side in there, right, for the creation. And that you see right there, the goddess Asera's two snakes. I love those snakes. They are just awesome. It was not worship of the devil they were doing. You were just told it was the devil, but it was actually a goddess and a god. See, to pierce the veil, you really have to think, who are these demons and bad people? The people we're just calling bad, and we don't even know why they're bad. In fact, we don't even know what good is, right? Because I know you don't really know what good is, because I've questioned people and they have no clue. They don't know what good and evil is. So you are just blindly brainwashed to call certain things bad. When you look at those demons and you look at the bad ones and trace them back to figure out who they really are and think, who are they really? Well, it's a main ancient goddess you now know as Jesus and Mary Magdalene. You can see the goddess Asera healing pool right between Baphomet's legs. And there was a baby. Okay, let's get to who the baby was. So the two figures who have the baby, who are the planet Venus, right, are Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which are representations of the original goddess. And they birth. Who did they birth? Who is the baby? Who is the baby from the whore and from Jesus? They birth another Jesus, another Mary, and another one of themselves. They birth themselves. So yes, in other words, the Virgin Mary is the mother, and then she is also birthed the bride of Christ. So she is the mother and the bride of Christ, which is When you research Goddess of Sarah, you'll see over and over that everyone's like all confused because they're like, well, I think she's the Virgin Mary, but I think she's Mary Magdalene. No, she's both, and she's Jesus, like the sponge. They are both in all the same thing, because Jesus is a planet which rises, then falls, and then is killed, then is resurrected in a new incarnation, then is killed, and then it just happens again. So in other words, when they kill this figure again and again on the cross or wherever they're killing it or chopping it down, it will then be resurrected and eventually renamed as something else, but it's still the same thing. Okay? So, in other words, the offspring or the baby of this skeleton in the Skull and Bones story is the resurrected itself, Jesus, under a new name. And it is itself, the baby. Every time it gets reborn over and over and over again under a new name, it is still the morning star and the evening star, the planet Venus. I hope that made sense. And Jesus says this. He proves this in the Bible. This is what Jesus says. This really shocked me. He tells us. He says, I am the root and the offspring. I am the root and I am the offspring. Meaning, Jesus is the original one, the root. The sponge breaks off, and the offspring is also Jesus, under a different name. She was originally back here as Goddess of Sarah, and she's descending under different incarnations. That is Revelation 22:16. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the offspring and the bright and morning star. That's the key right there. Also, God and Goddess births God and Goddess, right? So we keep getting birthed in the eternal waters of life, the womb waters. God and Goddess keeps just getting reborn over and over and again as humans. And if you think about it, we are the body of Christ, right? We are Jesus. We keep birthing more and more and more of the body of Christ, of Jesus. This is how it happens. So this whole passage that I just read you from the Bible is the key to the wormhole back in time. What I believe is somebody from the Knights Templar or another secret society, they infiltrated the patriarchs who were choosing what scrolls and words would be left in the Bible, and as the patriarchs corrupted the scrolls and turned it into the modern Jesus killers book that we now call it the Bible, and the other things like the Quran and stuff that also killed off the goddess, they fought to leave clues in the Bible, or they just couldn't keep the clues out because they were just converting an ancient goddess story and trying to hide it, but it just didn't happen very well. It's hard to hide everything. But if somebody did fight for these keys or clues to be left in the Bible, well, they would have been left there for some of us who are smart enough to see the truth, to help lead a way for us to find the path back to the truth of what happened. They did not want the patriarchs to just enslave us women. They wanted to protect us and the goddess and the balance between men and women and other types of groups of opposites. In other words, different sides. So now you see that the baby that the Jesus and Mary skeleton birthed in the Skull and Bones story appears to still be Jesus and Mary, the planet Venus, but it is usually under a different name. Because the patriarchs were trying to kill off the goddess over and over and change her name and gender, and these secret societies were just keeping track and leaving clues as to the truth. And they still do that, by the way. I swear, I really feel they do, because I have seen things in billboards and everywhere I look, and I'm like, ain't that interesting? Here's something interesting I discovered about Goddess of Sarah, the goddess of Sidon or Lord of Sidon. Her child came from Hellel. In other words, her child Lucifer, which we also know as Jesus, was born from Hellel. And when they demonized her, they simply called her womb Hell and said Lucifer came from Hell. But remember, Jesus is Lucifer, who is the goddess. under a different name like a sponge birth. After I learned about all of this, to my shock, I suddenly discovered an older incarnation of this ancient goddess Asera. Now my logo is the two snakes at balance, right? And the goddess Asera has two snakes around her healer pole. And my name and my snakes and everything, they're just leading me on a path here. So I did an online search for the snake goddess. I thought, who is the snake goddess? And I found her. Now remember, in ancient India, they revered and they trained snakes, and goddess Asera came from the vegetarian cow religions, which is most, obvious now, being upheld mostly in India. And they trained and they revered the snakes and honored them to protect the home. Why? Well, snakes weren't always considered to be bad, and they probably caught rats in the grain fields just like cats did. In Egypt, the cat was like the bomb. She was like the top goddess, okay? So in ancient Egypt, which was mostly a vegetarian grain-based society, they revered cats as their main goddess. So I'd assume they would love any animal that caught the mice and rats that ate up their grains and their food, including snakes. The cat goddess was a major figure back then, so why wouldn't the snake goddess also be a major figure? They loved those beings that helped us to protect our food. In ancient Egypt, snakes were also seen as a sign of immortality because they would shed their skin and they would get a new one, which was seen as a symbol of reincarnation. So after I looked up the snake goddess, I found snake goddess Wadjet, which is the oldest name and representation for the goddess I have found so far. Her eye, the eye of Wadjet, the all-seeing eye, is on the dollar bill, secretly preserved with a pyramid from ancient Egypt. The all-seeing eye, yeah. If you do an online search for the meaning of goddess Wadjet's name, you get this exactly. The Wadjet or Ujat, meaning whole one, is a powerful symbol of ancient protection in ancient Egypt, also known as the Eye of Horus or the All-Seeing Eye. Let's look at some of her symbols. You can see the 3 SSS here. S or X also stands for 6, so this is a 666 symbol. 666 is the symbol of the ancient goddess, not Satan, who she was demonized and turned into, right? So stop thinking about the 666 as a bad thing, because that's what they told you to do. So 666 is a symbol of the ancient goddess, not who she was demonized and turned into as the devil or Lucifer or Satan. She was also once known as goddess Isis in one of her incarnations. Now if you look up the 666 goddess Isis, if you put into an online search 666 goddess Isis, you will find that this goddess symbol, the 666, was linked also to goddess Isis. And she had this 666 on her marks, the mark of the 666, or on her money, as there was often money created in this ancient goddess's name. And goddess Isis, she had her marks stamped with this number. Mark means money, literally. You can also see that on the bottom of this, her legs are spread over the waters. In the Bible, as the Whore of Babylon, she is described as sitting on many waters. This could represent the ocean or the seas, but it could also represent womb water, because womb water is the exact same composition as seawater. It could mean both womb water and seawater or oceans at the same time. The waters of eternal life we learn about in the Bible are the womb waters and would therefore represent reincarnation as described also in the Eastern religions. She also has 2 snakes on either side of her, and these snakes are facing her as they do in my logo, which to me means obviously I was meant to tell you these things. I told you I'm a real church. When she was known in ancient Egypt as the snake goddess Wadjet, she was represented on the pharaoh's crowns as the snake up here. She is the Holy One. The Minoan name for the snake goddess was Asasarami. Asasarami, which means mistress. Literally. Mistress is the female word for master. I'm going to read off of Wikipedia here for you about the Minoan snake goddess name. The snake goddess's Minoan name may be related with Asasera. Tentatively, the inscription Asasarami seems to have accompanied goddesses, with the Hittite Ishasara, which means mistress. That's right, MFs. The Minoans are openly known to have had a matriarchal religion in life. Does anyone remember learning in Sunday school about the dreaded golden calf? That horrible golden calf. Yeah. And we were taught never worship the calf. Just say no to that golden calf. I don't know about you, but I remember thinking in Sunday school, what the heck is the golden calf? Who cares? And like, why? I don't understand why it's so bad. I like cows. I talk to the cows all the time. They talk to me. What's so wrong with the cow? I finally recognized that the golden calf was a statue dedicated to the ancient goddess who came from the ancient vegetarian cow worshipping religions, right? And that would have been made bad along with everything else about her. Those religions, which are mostly descended into India today and are preserved the best there, you know, they saw the cows as giving milk like a mother does when she gives the milk. And since the mother was a divine goddess because her womb was the portal that creates us and brings us from the spirit world to here, they thought, well, she's a mother goddess. You know, she supports us and gives us life. So they worshipped the cows as the same thing as the mother, you know, the woman. For the ancient goddess to wear cow horns or moon horns was, you know, obviously once seen as divine before she was demonized by the patriarchs and her horns were made out to be her devil horns. So now you can start to see. It's very clear now, right? How the patriarchs took the original snake and sea cow goddess, known in the Bible as the Queen of Heaven, turned her into Satan and demonized her, and they taught you to hate her. Even though you were taught also not to hate, so that makes no sense. Because all I ever hear you saying is, I hate Lucifer, I hate Satan. And I'm like, you know what? I thought you were supposed to give a little love. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're allowed to hate whatever you want. That's cool. But I'm just saying, you aren't all loving if you hate Satan. You're not. So why are we so scared? There's no reason to be scared. In other words, all these images and things that we call demons, that you think are demons and are Satan and all that kind of stuff, they just tie back directly to an ancient goddess who was married to God or was God totally, that the patriarchs feared because they didn't like matriarchy and they killed her off and demonized her. That's all it is. There's nothing to be afraid of. Now, in her incarnation in India as goddess Kali, and in some other incarnations she's known as, she has snakes, and just like in the Garden of Eden when she was the tree and she had the snakes, she also has a trident. Goddess Kali, when she's known as Goddess Kali, and Lord Shiva, they have tridents, right? And that is now known as the Devil's Pitchfork, right? The trident, the goddess of the sea, Poseidon, Lady of the Sea, Lady Mariclara, turned into devil with the trident. There is also a story of her as Kali and other incarnations of her story when she actually slays an evil being, right? Evil, of course, being a point of view. But the story goes, if the blood of this being hits the ground, every single drop that hit the ground would turn into another one of those evil beings. So she had to drink the blood, all of this blood, and suck it out of the ground and eat all this blood to keep the evil being from re-emerging. Which may be where we get the Jesus blood drinking stories from. Also, the Inca religion had an almost exact replica of Christianity with slightly different names to it. So they had the sun was the son of God. So the sun, and then they had the blood drinking or the communion came out of a priest, and the blood would flow down a channel and people would come slurp it up. Nasty, but whatever. Now, when she was known as Goddess Sarah, or maybe before that, she also, the goddess, became a tree. Just like in my vision of the tree that me becoming the tree that many of you know of. In other words, the tree in our Garden of Eden with the snakes, and also she became the Christmas tree. Yes, she became the Christmas tree because the goddess loved to wear silver and gold. Why wouldn't she? I do too. And we put that as tinsel on our Christmas trees, right? She also, as the Christmas tree, wears the morning star, Lucifer, Venus. She puts the star on the top of her head. We always put the stars on the top of our Christmas trees, right? Yep. So we still celebrate her, the tree, as the Jesus birth on Christmas. So I don't know when or where she became known as the goddess of vegetation and she became a grove of trees. But this is very interesting because it talks about it in the Bible. It talks about her as a tree and also them, God, the male God, the patriarch's God, killing her and chopping her down. So starting in Ezekiel 31:3 and going to about Ezekiel 31:13 or something, the Bible describes her as a tree in the Garden of Eden, and that she is a grove of trees. And look up as Sarah, grove of trees. Goddess is Sarah, grove of trees. She does turn into a tree in her story. So it says here that in Ezekiel 31:3, she was a grove of trees. She was much mightier and much more beautiful and wonderful than any of the trees in the male god's grove. Yep, because of this and his jealousy and his anger, hello, sounds like the patriarch's story here, he chopped her down and devastated her. This is biblical proof of what they did. They put their own story into the Bible. They wrote about it. And don't think that the cow goddess religion stuff only descended into India. It didn't. Her story was mutated into every religion that I have researched so far. I just don't know about the Chinese religions and maybe some other smaller religions. But I've seen the dragons and stuff, and I think she isn't in the Chinese religions. Let's take a look at Islam. Here's the evidence in the Quran. In this passage in the Quran, appropriately entitled, "The Cow," says that Allah has only forbidden to you dead animals' blood, the flesh of swine. In other words, all Muslims are commanded by Allah to be vegetarians by the cow, who is the goddess cow, worshipping goddess we are talking about. Obviously the ancient snake goddess. It then goes on to say that if you are forced to eat animals for survival, then you're excused. You know, nothing, you have to survive, so. Have you ever noticed in our American culture that the cows are like the most enslaved and the most hated? And in fact, not only do we torture cows, but to be called a cow is now an insult. Yeah, it's just another sign of how we took the cow and the cow worshipping religions and made it bad. Probably by people who wanted to kill the cows. Okay, now look at this word for Allah. The goddess's 666 symbol is right there in the sign for Allah. Before Allah, she was known as Allat, one phase of the Muslim Trinity goddess, which is the same goddess, obviously, descended by a different name. I will link an amazing article down below that my Facebook friend Randy sent to me about an ancient pottery shard or artifact that it was discovered, and it links Allah to being the same figure as the harlot goddess. In other words, the whore of Babylon, the ancient goddess known as Wadjet, Allat, Lucifer, and Jesus. So, you know, Allah is the same figure that we're talking about here. Archaeologists discover a 4,000-year-old archaeological find linking Allah to Lucifer and the harlot religion. Read this article, okay? It just goes into the goddess culture, which also protected and housed male and female prostitutes, by the way. By the way, it is also known that Allah, even as it is seen today, is not a man. Allah is not a man. This is a mistranslation. People admit to that are from Islam, and you can find them online and watch their videos. And they're trying to explain why did they call Allah a man when Allah is not a man. Completely insulting, I think. Hey, sorry if the sound just changed. I'm an idiot. Whenever I'm filming, I always do something wrong. I hate that about myself. And I didn't have my good microphone plugged in. So anyways, I hope the sound is okay. As I was saying, it is well known that Allah, even as Allah is known today, is not a man. This is a mistranslation or a mistake. It is agreed today that Allah is neither a man or a woman, as this is limiting, and to call Allah a he is a gross error. Don't worry, because I am Jesus and I am therefore Muhammad's best friend, so I can discuss these things with you as a friend. But I'm just going to tell you that's an error. Please do not refer to Allah as a he. Allah is not a man. We also notate that the original Trinity in the Christian religion would probably also be, you know, a goddess Trinity. I've already proven the Holy Spirit was a woman, at minimum. So Christians are doing it too. Everyone's doing it. Everyone's doing it everywhere. It really, like, kind of pisses me off sometimes. Don't ask me why I just suddenly started talking like, I don't know, someone weird. Alright. I can't imagine the persecution that these Skull and Bones and other groups have been through. Like, they're just constantly getting attacked, and you see all the attacking that they get online. It's horrible. And they always get told, like, act as if they're evil or bad still. It's ridiculous. I mean, they're doing all of this to, what I think is to protect the goddess, and they might not have even known what they were protecting, and they had to go through all of that persecution. So what I want to say is just get off their freaking backs, okay? I mean, they might know what they're protecting, though. They might know what they're doing. Does anyone remember the Trident missile they just shot off that I mentioned earlier? There was one that went off over Russia, and there was one that went off right over Los Angeles, shot off right above my head, right up here, okay? I didn't see it, but here's a photo of it, and I'll link a video of it in the description below. Now, because the goddess had a trident, and she was the Lady of the Sea, right? And her trident got turned into the devil pitchfork. Well, then we had the Trident missile go off. Trident missile is going off. Lady of the Sea, Lucifer, pitchfork. Like, I don't know, but you know, and then there was the ISIS group. They named this bad group that I think chops people's heads off or something. I don't follow them. I don't know anything about them actually, but I just know there's a group out there called ISIS that everyone hates. And I'm like, so yeah, obviously I think they do know something about this, because they just keep using the same names of the goddess and everything. So I feel as if, you know, they've taken the ISIS word, and the opposite side maybe that's fighting them is putting out there the ISIS word to smear the name and to make it a bad thing or something like that. I don't know. Make it something you hate. But yes, obviously someone is putting these ancient ideas and words out there. So there's a possibility that this is not coincidence, and that this is still part of an ages-long war over hating and fighting and trying to kill off the goddess, or protecting and loving her. Or maybe they're all doing it now just to make money off of this battle. I don't know. Crap. Anyways, I believe right now that the Skull and Bones group and Knights Templar and these types, the Masons, are supposed to be protecting and preserving her, the Queen of Heaven, Lucifer, Jesus, Mary, on, even if they don't know it. But like I said, after a really long time of playing the pass along the knowledge game, you might forget, not even know what the knowledge is that you're passing along. Just that it's important to preserve it because you got told that. You might even be changed by the majority or the oppressors. In fact, your organization may have even become patriarchal, which I'm pretty sure it did. In fact, the oppressors might even have convinced you that you are the evil ones. When in fact, Skull and Bones, in my opinion, and Knights Templar and all those are the good ones, who are rescuing and preserving the balance between men and women and the goddess and everything like that, and saving her information until a time when she can be revealed safely. So let's just recap. Recap time. The ancient goddess, the all-seeing eye, became of Wadjet, became a series of other goddesses when she was killed off, right, by the patriarchs. They changed her name. It ended up eventually becoming Jesus, and they put the story of her being killed as a central part of their Jesus Killers Bible called the Crucifixion of Jesus. She was also transformed in other patriarchal ways into many other religions on this planet, including Muslims, Jewish, and everything, okay? So it's not just Christians that did this. These religions, I should say, are what I call denominations of my main church, my original main church. When she was killed, secret groups and societies formed to preserve her. They are now being called bad along with her. When they demonized her as Satan and Lucifer, they also started demonizing these groups. And the Skull and Bones looks scary, so it's easy to make it seem scary. Then at some point, when they realized the world was not, just matriarchal, and they realized men were important too in the creation of the child in the womb, in the eternal waters of life, creation being God itself, and bringing a spirit to our physics dimension from the death world, otherwise known as heaven sometimes, the heavens. Well, they needed a man and a woman, right? And so they made the goddess halfway into a man and halfway into a woman. That is why the goddess, is often symbolized as both a male and a female in the same statue or symbol, such as Baphomet, and why she can be known as Jesus and Mary, and the planet Venus, which rises once at night and once in the morning. So this male and female figurine of creation, what the Knights Templar used to worship and the Skull and Bones group worship, and what they were worshiping and doing was not evil. Not evil. It was preserving the goddess from being totally destroyed by the patriarchs. And even though you have been taught to hate her and taught to call her Lucifer and Satan and think, I hate you, bitch. Well, she is no more bad than God is, and God created everything. So why don't you blame God for once, please? Also, I want to let you know that Jesus' mission here is to be a sword to bring men and women back together again. So next time you see the Skull and Bones, don't forget, it is a symbol for the X chromosome, or the goddess, and Jesus and Mary and all of it, and the ancient original goddess. Thank you for watching and being patient. I know this was a really long video. Thank you for preserving and protecting. It's made my life better. I am more than grateful for that, because I was not happy in a world that told me I was in a patriarchy and that seemed like a patriarchy. I was not happy. So whoever you are and whatever you did, you have helped me greatly. And I will not forget that. So thank you. Thank you for me. Thank you for all womankind. And thank you for all mankind. Bye.